Hello, respected viewers. It's George from Ireland. So, welcome back to the channel once again. So, the big news out today is the United Kingdom has announced it's providing Storm Shadow missiles to Ukraine. Now, these are longer range missiles. They're fired from jets. They can be fired from Soviet era jets, for example. Now, the HIMARS rockets had a range of 80 kilometers, whereas the Storm Shadow cruise missile has a range of more than 250 kilometers. That's what it says on the tin. That's what the manufacturer says. So the Defense Secretary Ben Wallace said this. So Ukrainian pilots will be able to hit targets deep behind Russian lines. Now, Ukraine has been beseeching Western countries for this for a very long time. And anyway, the UK government said they took this decision because Russia persisted in targeting civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. It did all through the winter. They more or less ran out of missiles by spring. There's a brief break, but over the last week or so, they've done it again several times. Obviously targeting apartment buildings and hospitals, clinics, hundreds of them, schools, even a theater which is housing civilians, even had the word in Russian, children above it. That was hit, and electricity infrastructure and so on, to try and freeze people to death in winter. Think this would break the morale of the Ukrainians. That was Surovikin's policy. Now, it failed and is obviously increasingly unsuccessful as they've run out of the more sophisticated guided missiles and so on. And the Ukrainians got better and better anti-aircraft or air defense capability. Now, admittedly, some of this will be cock-up rather than conspiracy, just missing, just they're not terribly accurate weapons aiming to hit the army base and accidentally hit the school beside it. But it's happened far too often for it to always be accidental. Even the Russian military is not quite that stupid. And so this is being done. So the risk is that the Ukrainians would use this to hit bases inside Russia rather than the illegally occupied areas of Ukraine. Now, that would be a temptation for the Ukrainians. We know they're Russian military bases, air bases, and so on, ammunition stops, even armaments factories, and it could destroy all of those. There's some very soft targets. There's been on condition that only used inside Ukraine itself. Because remember, from the Ukrainian border to Moscow is 450 kilometers. These missiles, 250-kilometer range, would go most of that way. So they wouldn't hit Moscow, but there are other things they would hit, high-value targets. And I think the Ukrainians will stick to that. They've already always scrupulously observed this, and they've never bragged about hitting things inside Russia, that they blatantly have done so. They neither confirm nor deny when they hit inside Russia. So they were warned last Christmas by Ben Wallace. He wrote to the Russian defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, saying that if such attacks carry on, then the United Kingdom might give weapons of greater range and accuracy, and indeed they've done so. So they've had a very long warning to do this. They've disregarded that, and this is the corollary. But anyway, some people are a bit worried. There could be some Russian pushback. Is this escalating the conflict? I mean, I'm not sure how it is an escalatory step as the war's been on for 15 months. Russia's blustered, huffed and puffed and done nothing, and they've got no capability to do anything. I mean, I read a very reassuring article the other day saying, for various reasons, they're not going to launch a nuclear strike. They never have, they never would. You think what would happen to them, and so on. And whatever military advantage it would have within Ukraine would be hugely outweighed by the repercussions. Even the Chinese would come down against them. Anyway, but if the United Kingdom does this, ideally other NATO countries will follow suit. The UK led the way, I think it was with tanks, is already training the Ukrainians on modern jets, not actually donated any of them. But what on earth is the purpose of training them on jets, which is very expensive and very time-consuming of RAF personnel, if you're not actually going to hand them over? You might as well eventually hand them over. Depends how long this takes. I mean, to train on a new jet, I'm told, takes up to 2 years. Now, part of that's for safety's sake. You don't want to crash in a routine flight, but as they're already fighting, the pilots' lives are in danger anyway. Presumably, you can reduce that. That's why it's been given to them. So anyway, Putin's spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that the Russians will have an opposite response to what's being done. He's not spelt out what that is. Now, I suppose they could try and arm Britain's enemies, but the United Kingdom's not fighting anywhere, got no troops in Afghanistan or Iraq for a long time. Any potential enemies? I mean, Islamist terrorist groups, I can't think whoever they are, which would be a rich irony considering that Putin poses as the enemy of such people, but obviously is in bed with them. Khalifa Haftar and the Libyan National Army, which is not its actual army, is a terrorist organization. Allegedly helping the Taliban too. I don't actually know if that one about the Taliban is true, but nothing would surprise me. So this obviously is going to help the Ukrainian counteroffensive to try and take back Crimea, said to be a very tall order. I mean, personally, I don't think they're going to take back Crimea, certainly not this year. Anyway, so there are also French missiles that are being supplied, and they can be fired from ships and submarines. The trouble is, I don't think the Ukrainians have got any left in the Black Sea. I mean, they've only got like 3 small ports still in their hands. Maybe they got them ships there. I don't know. Could they get some ships? They'd have to dock somewhere. They'd have to sail in through the Bosphorus. Turkey would have to allow that to happen. A NATO country presumably would, and then try and make it up to their ports without being hit by the Russians. I'm surprised they didn't retake Snake Island. I mean, Snake Island, the only significant island in the Black Sea, is that not that far from Romania, also claimed by Romania, about 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. And in Romania, it's called the Insula Șerpilor as well, which just means island of snakes. And nobody lives there. It's this craggy island. But its advantage is you can put helicopter landing pads, you can store things in there, because of course on ships there's very, very little space for extra fuel, food, other equipment. Sailors could live there when they're not going to be on their ships. That's the great thing. And you cannot sink an island, whereas you can sink a ship, which even one missile below the waterline, and that's it, it's sunk. On the other hand, ships can at least move, but the island can't. But that's why it could be quite useful to control the island. The Ukrainians got it back, but they're not actually they don't actually have any troops on it right now. So these Storm Shadow things obviously definitely are increasing the increasing Ukraine's capability. How many have sent, we just don't know. So in February this year, Rishi Sunak, he said that the United Kingdom was willing to send longer range missiles, but they didn't actually do so at that time. But they also want to be able to replace them so that the UK is not denuded if it were come to another war. So the Storm Shadow missile has proved its worth, and France, the United Kingdom, they've used them in the Gulf War in 1991, in Iraq, in Libya, in more recent years. So obviously quite worrying for Russia. But I wonder if it's a bit of a mistake to say that, because now the Russians are aware of this. Will they move some things out of the way? Why do they announce it? Put a chill wind in the mind of the Russians. There is another thought in my mind. If suddenly various bits of Russian assets blow up and are well out of Ukrainian range, what they think is Ukrainian range, 80 kilometers, they might think, are NATO countries attacking us directly? Is this a third world war? But if no, they know the Ukrainians have got this already. They're not going to jump to the conclusion that it's the United States, France, the UK, Germany, Canada, or one of those attacking Russian positions. So yeah, this is Ukrainian counteroffensive. When is it going to begin? Well, I don't have a hotline to Volodymyr Zelensky, but I mean, I think this month. Faintly surprised it hasn't happened already. They didn't do something to try and spoil Victory Day parade in Moscow, because you could scarcely miss with 8,000 soldiers on Red Square. At least frighten people and say we're going to do something, and those presidents of other countries stay away. The president of Kazakhstan, of Kyrgyzstan, of Tajikistan, where else was it? Belarus, and I think it was Uzbekistan, and the Prime Minister of Armenia, Nikol Pashinyan. They all went, 6 foreign leaders. Quite a turn up for the books, considering no foreign leaders went the year before. I think Putin told them not to, because it'd be embarrassing if like one turned up, Lukashenko. But they obviously don't think there's too much harm in going, and some of these countries, particularly Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Armenia, are very reliant on Russia. Well, Belarus as well. Kazakhstan could have stayed away. The Uzbeks likewise. But having them there maybe made the Ukrainians hesitant about hitting Red Square, because they might accidentally kill the president of Kazakhstan or something. Anyway, thank you for watching the channel. So please donate on PayPal, georgecallahan79 @gmail.com. Toodaloo.